The Senate will come to order, and the chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal and ever-blessed God, the Alpha and Omega, thank you for the gift of this day. Give us the wisdom to use it to enrich lives by service to others. Use our lawmakers to continue your momentum in our world, enabling them to become salt and light to this generation. Lord, as our senators strive to be productive members of the family of humanity, empower them to do your will. Supply their needs out of the bounty of your celestial riches. If they fall, may they fall forward as they trust you to remain the author and finisher of their faith. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Madam President.
The Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Madam President,
The senator from
ask the
Washington,
quorum call be dispensed with.
without objection.
Madam President, probably
1 moment. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 3684, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 100, H.R. 3684, an act to authorize funds for federal aid highways, highway safety programs, and transit programs and for other purposes.
Madam President, many states in the United States need infrastructure investment, but I would put the state of Washington high on a list of states that desperately need infrastructure investment. We've been blessed with a growing economy and a big trade economy based on the Pacific Rim and the actions of the Pacific Rim. So we need to keep moving product, we need to keep moving services, and we need infrastructure investment to do so. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the work done by the Commerce Committee and those who worked on the Infrastructure Investment Act, specifically Kara Fisher, Michael Davison, Joni Lofgren, Zeb Zor, Ronce Allman, Alex Simpson, Gigi Solis, Nicole Tuchel, Jennifer Kwan, Matthew Babink, Jamie Burgess, David Martin, Amit Renan, Stacey Baird, Devin Heflin, Patrick Enroth, Nassim Maher, Hannah Albert, Eric Verheide, El Wibisono, John Branscombe, Sean Bone, Brian McDermott, Mary Claire York, Jared Blomberg, Shannon Smith, John Beezer, Noam Cantor, Jordan Blue, Tiffany George, Lucy Cock, Hunter, Hedspeth Blackburn, Kelly Ryan, Dave Stewart, Melissa Porter, and David Strickland. So these are just some of the individuals that were involved in putting together the commerce piece of this underlying bill. About 20% of the underlying bill was the focus of the Commerce Committee in its jurisdiction. I want to thank Ranking Member Wicker and his staff for the hard work to pull off what was the bipartisan bill that came to the Senate floor as part of this package. Our legislation, I think, is a historic investment to rebuild our transportation infrastructure, including investments in things like mega projects, basically helping to eliminate our problems at grade crossings, improve our freight network, improve our environment by removing culverts, and helping Amtrak better serve the United States of America. All these were important investments, but we should look at the first. First, we're authorizing for the first time mega projects. Mega projects often take up so much of our budgets in our states and federally, they never get funded. But that doesn't mean they aren't critical to the United States. In the Northeast Corridor, we certainly have mega projects. In the Pacific Northwest, we have mega projects that will be critical, like the Columbia River crossing between Vancouver and Portland, or the Highway 2 trestle in Everett. These projects deserve the attention of the nation, and with this first-time authorization, we'll get so. The bill also puts a historic investment in freight and in Amtrak. As I mentioned, the economy of a global nature is demanding that we be able to move competitively our products. But if we don't continue to invest in freight, we're not going to get that job done. So this provides $66 billion to improve our passenger rail and freight system, the single largest investment that we've had in our Amtrak system that was funded 50 years ago. The Commerce Committee bill laid the foundation for this funding, which I believe will do three things. It will mean more investment to fix the problems in the Northeast Corridor. More specifically, it will give us the ability to have more sequencing of trains throughout the United States of America, and it will provide for new service in city pairs that I hope will help economies all across the United States with more investments. I know specifically the senator from Montana, Senator Tester, was very adamant about our Amtrak funding and the services that Montana demands. I want to thank him for his help on this. And want to thank Senator Duckworth for her hard work in making sure that Amtrak complies with the Americans with Disability Act. This is so important for us to do, and her language making sure that we also have someone from the disabilities community on the Amtrak board is the kind of things that should be followed in other examples in this legislation.
I also want to say for the first time, we are addressing specifically at-grade crossings. This is the instance where congestion and freight in my state, multiple times the increase in freight traffic. Again, a lot of Midwest product moving to Asia has increased a demand in safety and transportation. Somebody quoted one of our reports that it took freight 3 days to get through just the city of Chicago because of the amount of congestion. So our job here is to make sure that our product, made and grown in the United States of America, gets quickly to its destinations, or we will be out-competed by other nations that have an infrastructure system that can beat us to those marketplaces. So this provides, for the first time, a focused program on improving at-grade crossings to continue to make the investments that need to be made to keep our freight moving and our public safe. It also, for the first time, authorizes transportation improvements to repair culverts. Culverts and other transportation infrastructure has done damage to our environment. They've done damage to fish. They've basically blocked spawning grounds. They have caused other infrastructure challenges to species all along our coastal states. This program will help to improve that situation by repairing some of the fish passage that has been blocked for so many years. This is so important for us in the Pacific Northwest, but it's also important throughout the South and for our many, many coastal communities. So this transportation legislation that went through the Commerce Committee, as I said, also it makes other investments. This floor bill also makes other investments for bridge repair, for transit systems, for climate resiliency, and specifically for our airports. Probably haven't heard too much about that out here on the floor. But in the Commerce Committee, I can tell you that aviation, transportation, and competitive, I know the president knows this very well, that in Las Vegas or in Reno, that infrastructure like our airports is essential to our economies continuing to grow. SeaTac is probably one of the fastest growing airports in the United States right now. And under this legislation, we will also see an important improvement for our airports so they can continue to grow, so we can continue to make investments. I also want to, as I mentioned, thank Senator Wicker in the title for vehicle safety. These are important provisions that he and I and others on the committee, Senator Blumenthal for his work on safety legislation that related to both the Northeast Corridor and to individuals in transportation, including with Senator Wicker, the life-saving technology that automatic emergency braking system and preventing child heat stroke deaths in impaired driving facilities. So, Madam President, I again thank all of the members of the Commerce Committee for their hard work in getting this legislation as part of this package. I think we can see that we have some firsts here. First, investing in mega projects. First, cleaning up our environmental problems with culverts, getting our freight product through our most congested corridors with improved at-grade crossing, and making the major investment that Amtrak can continue to expand. So I look forward to working with my colleagues as we move through the legislative process and continue to make improvements in our transportation infrastructure. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
The Republican leader.
Later today, Senate Democrats want to take their next big step toward playing Russian roulette with our country. They want to begin pushing through a reckless taxing and spending spree that was authored by our self-described socialist colleague, Chairman Sanders. Today, the American people will learn exactly where each of their senators stand. The American people elected a 50-50 Senate, an incredibly close House of Representatives, and a president who pledged to govern down the middle and unify the country. But as soon as President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and Leader Schumer got the keys, they handed them right over to the far left. Remember, Democrats inherited 3 safe and effective vaccines that were already rolling out nationwide and an economy that was primed to come roaring back. But our colleagues pressed ahead with a massive springtime spending package that even liberal experts said would drive inflation. And of course it did. Overall inflation has risen at the fastest rate in nearly 13 years. Core inflation hit its highest level in almost 30 years. Families are getting hit by higher prices everywhere, from the grocery store to the gas station to their housing costs. Small businesses have had trouble reopening because would-be workers are getting a government bonus to actually stay home. So the country is still working through the side effects of the borrowing and spending the Democrats forced through back in the spring. But Democrats don't want to just refill their socialist prescription. They want to double the dose. According to what they just released, Democrats want to unite behind Chairman Sanders' resolution to spend a staggering $4.2 trillion more dollars. Of course, outside experts estimate the real cost will be even higher still. If it's even close to fully offset, as they claim it is, this seems almost certain to be the largest peacetime tax hike on record. So let that sink in. The largest peacetime tax hike on record. Even though their rough sketch of these tax hikes would shatter President Biden's promise not to raise taxes on the middle class. Families earning well under the president's stated threshold would get hit and hit hard. This new reckless taxing and spending spree will fall like a hammer blow on workers and middle-class families. Fewer jobs, lower wages, more inflation pushing costs higher and higher. What our colleagues are proposing and planning is absolutely jaw-dropping. People want to pretend this is just business as usual, just liberals doing liberal things using Senate procedure. Make no mistake, this reckless taxing and spending spree is nothing like we've seen, nothing. The basic math of their taxing and spending is toxic enough, but the radicalism that we'll be debating on the floor goes well beyond dollars and cents. The policies they want to put behind this budget resolution read like somebody walked across the rotunda to the House and handed the squad a pen and piece of paper. Sweeping amnesty for illegal immigrants in the middle of a border crisis. Regulations that are so radical that our colleague Senator Markey, quote, said the Green New Deal is in the DNA of this budget resolution. All of the things that are in this we talked about in the Green New Deal, end quote, Senator Markey. They want to introduce 49 other states to make their, they want to induce 49 other states to make their electric grids more like California's, make it more expensive to mine critical minerals we need to compete with China. They want to take working families' child tax credit and turn it into a permanent welfare program, listen to this, with no work requirement. They want to tamper with the prescription drug industry in ways that would leave Americans with fewer new treatments and fewer new cures. They want to put government's thumb on the scale of families' child care choices and selectively subsidize parents whose households work the way Washington wants. And they want to tax more money out of Americans' pockets while reviving a special tax cut that overwhelmingly benefits wealthy people in blue states. So let's face it, the brute facts of the Senate's rules mean that if 50 Democrats plus the Vice President stick together, Republicans will probably not be able to save our colleagues from themselves. If all 50 Democrats want to help Chairman Sanders hurt middle-class families, if even our colleagues who claim they're moderates want to follow the far left off this cliff, well, that's their prerogative. But we're going to argue it out right here on the floor at some length. Every single senator will be going on record over and over and over. Senate Republicans will be bringing forward common sense amendments that represent what Americans actually want and actually need. Our colleagues can look forward to votes on national security and funding our armed forces, votes to remove backdoor tax cuts for wealthy liberals, votes to protect family-owned small businesses and family farms from crushing tax hikes, votes to encourage schools to finally reopen in person, to stop the catch and release of COVID-positive illegal immigrants coming into our country, to protect taxpayers from being forced to fund the horrors of abortion. And that's just a sampling. Because our Democratic colleagues missed some deadlines, it has been an all-out sprint to prepare amendments. So I want to thank our nonpartisan Senate clerks and parliamentarians. They've worked multiple weekends straight through. They were kept up late last night processing hundreds of amendments, and they're going to be up late with all of us yet again. If President Biden and 50 Senate Democrats want to outsource domestic policy to Chairman Sanders, if this historically reckless taxing and spending spree is how the modern Democratic Party wants to define itself, if they want inflation and tax hikes to be their legacy, then Republicans do not currently have the votes to spare the American families this nightmare. But we will debate, and we will vote, and we will stand up, and we will be counted. And the people of this country will know exactly which senators fought for them. I suggest the open to quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Mr. President,
The majority whip is recognized.
are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this past Saturday at 9 p.m., Chicago police officer Ella French was shot and killed during a traffic stop on the Chicago South Side. Her death is devastating. Officer French was 29 years old. She'd served as a member of the Chicago Police Department since 2018. Her brother described her as the epitome of a good Samaritan. A fellow officer said of her, and I quote, "She truly showed the community that she loved them and would do anything for them. Officer French's partner was also shot and critically wounded. We pray for his recovery. 2 men have been charged by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in the shooting of these officers. A third man has been charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois for conspiracy to violate federal firearms laws. I hope that justice is delivered swiftly and fairly for the perpetrators of this horrible crime. And let me be clear, as devastating as her death, scores of individuals are shot every week in Chicago, and many lose their lives. For each of their families, the loss is just as intense as the loss of Officer French. And as heartbreaking as Officer French's death is, it is also infuriating. We learned yesterday from the Chicago U.S. Attorney's Office that the gun used to murder Officer French was straw purchased from a gun dealer in Indiana. What is a straw purchase? It happens when a person who can pass a background check buys a gun and gives it to a person who can't. Straw purchases have long been the way that guns have funneled into the hands of those with felony convictions in Chicago, then to the streets, then to deadly incidents. According to the charges filed yesterday by the U.S. Attorney, an Indiana man bought the handgun from a dealer in Hammond, Indiana, gave it to a person with a felony conviction who allegedly used it this last weekend to kill Officer French. For years, I have been fighting to toughen our laws against straw purchases. Right now, straw purchasing is treated, listen to this, as a federal paperwork violation for lying on a federal gun purchase form. Charges are rarely brought, and when they are, the sentences are often just a matter of months. That needs to change. I've joined with Senator Leahy of Vermont and Senator Collins of Maine to introduce the Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act, a bipartisan bill that would make it an explicit federal crime carrying felony penalties when a person straw purchases a firearm. We need to take this type of gun trafficking seriously. It's time for us to stop treating straw purchases like a paperwork misdemeanor. As we have learned in the death of Officer French, it is a deadly act and should be punished accordingly. Officer French's death is also a call to action for the strike force recently set up by the Department of Justice to crack down on regional firearms trafficking in Chicago. I met with Attorney General Garland in Chicago when he launched the strike force 2 weeks ago, and I have written to him now urging that the strike force immediately prioritize the investigation and prosecution of straw purchases like the one that took the life of Officer French. The strike force was established to keep a sustained focus on firearms trafficking in Chicago. That focus should include stopping straw purchases and holding the perpetrators accountable. I look forward to working with the Justice Department and with my colleagues to find ways to crack down on the deadly gun violence that straw purchasers help to fuel. Mr. President, I ask for consent that the next statement I make be placed at a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, 2020 set a record for drug overdoses in America. More than 93,000 lives were lost in the year 2020. In Illinois, 3,500 of our neighbors died of an overdose, a 27% spike from the year before. How did we get to this point? Who's responsible for this? There is one clear culprit: the pharmaceutical industry. For years, opioid manufacturers deliberately lied about the risks of their drugs. Deliberately. These companies have claimed their painkillers should be prescribed for common aches and pains. They even downplayed their addictive nature, even though their research showed that it was a very real danger. These companies then shipped mountains of these pills to every corner of America. They aggressively promoted them to doctors with the backing of dark money organizations. This epidemic wasn't created by some infectious virus. It was created by corporate greed. Corporate greed. In the words of Richard Sackler of Purdue Pharma, his company chose to flood our streets with, quote, a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. It ended up burying the users. As a result, 500,000 American families have had to bury loved ones who died of opioid overdoses and addictions since the start of the opioid epidemic. 500,000 Americans, a figure in the same range as the 610,000 Americans we've lost to COVID-19. The numbers are numbing. From 2006 to 2014, drug companies like Purdue Pharma inundated the country with 100 billion pain pills. 100 billion. Let that soak in. That's roughly 300 opioid pills for every living American. They flooded communities like the rural county of Hardin in downstate Illinois. They received enough opioids in Hardin County for each resident to have a 3-month supply. Some counties in West Virginia and Kentucky had twice that level of oversupply. One farmer rep even bragged, quote, I don't know how they can even house this many bottles. Another wrote, keep them coming, flying out of here. It's like people are addicted to these things. Oh, wait, people are. That level of greed and disregard for human suffering is an outrage, and the companies responsible must be held accountable. You may be asking, well, haven't we done that already? It's a good question, because not only was the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration aware of this obscene volume of overproduction, they authorized it. They gave permission. The Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States federal government is responsible for determining the amount of opioid pills allowed to be put on the market each year. They are effectively the gatekeeper for these drug manufacturers. And for years, they allowed opioid production quotas to keep increasing. Between 1993 and 2015, production of oxycodone increased 39-fold, hydrocodone 12-fold, fentanyl 25-fold. In 2016, America's pharmaceutical industry produced 14 billion opioid doses in 2016 alone, enough for every adult in America to have a 3-week supply of opioids. Think about that. Authorized by the federal government, requested by the pharmaceutical industry, we put a quota that pharma asked for to produce 14 billion opioid pills in a year, enough for every American to have a 3-week supply. Any wonder that we had an opioid epidemic? I pressed the Drug Enforcement Administration on this issue years ago when I learned of this. I asked them, how can you approve these ever-increasing quotas? Pharma is insatiable. They will ask for as many pills as they can possibly push into the American people's families, especially when DEA had data that showed this overproduction was fueling a deadly national drug crisis. A couple years ago, I worked with my Republican colleague, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, to start stemming the tide of addictive drugs. We passed a bipartisan bill that gave the DEA the authority they said they needed to set common sense production levels. We changed the law so the DEA must consider abuse, overdose deaths, and the public health impact when determining opioid quotas. Our approach worked, partially. Over the past 5 years, the DEA has lowered opioid quotas by an average of 60%. The DEA, this federal agency, will soon be proposing its 2022 quotas. And I'm sending a letter urging them to use their new authority and common sense to rein in the greed of big pharma. In the face of all this suffering, new legal challenges have been brought to hold big pharma accountable for death and despair of the opioid epidemic. Thousands of lawsuits from states, counties, cities, victims have been consolidated in one federal court in Cleveland, Ohio. This movement reminded me of another breakthrough moment in public health when our nation came together to hold big tobacco accountable for its misleading marketing over the decades. We started holding these companies accountable in 1998 with the Master Tobacco Settlement Agreement. That settlement was estimated to provide states with $246 billion over 25 years. But despite the pressing need, only a tiny fraction, a meager 8% of that amount, was actually dedicated to tobacco prevention and cessation activities. Instead, with the permission of Congress, tens of billions from that settlement have gone toward filling gaps in state budgets and funding pet projects like roads and bridges, stadiums, even a tobacco museum. As new opioid settlements are reached, we must learn from the missed opportunity with tobacco lawsuits. We must ensure that the funds from forthcoming opioid settlements are used to fortify health systems so they can respond to the current opioid crisis and prevent our next drug epidemic. All of us know what's going on out there. Even people who acknowledge their opioid addiction and are desperate for treatment and need help immediately wait for weeks and months to enter a drug rehab facility. That's just unacceptable. We need community and residential-based treatment. We need to expand naloxone access. We need to bolster our behavioral health workforce. We need to address the childhood trauma, often at the root of addiction, and other public health strategies. Mr. President, one of the things which I believe is essential, as our kids get back to school after the pandemic experience, we need more counselors on the scene at the schools, dealing with these kids in this transition back into somewhat normal life. These are critical moments in a child's formation, and I hope that we can have resources available to help them. The best way to hold Big Pharma accountable is by compelling these companies to pay the price for fueling this crisis, and their restitution should be devoted to helping America heal. Last month, a bipartisan group of state attorneys general announced the framework of a litigation settlement involving Johnson & Johnson and the nation's 3 largest drug distributors. The companies would pay a total of $26 billion over 18 years to resolve the suits, in addition to changing their business practices. The work isn't over yet, and I applaud the state attorneys general for their extensive work involving these opioid defendants. Legal proceedings continue for several other key industry stakeholders that have yet to be held accountable. That includes the Sackler family of Purdue and OxyContin infamy. The Sacklers are trying to engineer a legal scheme to escape liability through the bankruptcy court. That's the family that started Purdue Pharma, that was responsible for this opioid crisis. They think they found a venue now, a bankruptcy court, that is going to get them off the hook, or at least make sure they can protect the money that they've made off of this criminal enterprise. The Sacklers are trying to engineer a legal scheme to escape liability for their conduct through the bankruptcy court, avoiding future lawsuits while paying $4.5 billion while protecting their vast fortunes estimated at over $11 billion. That's why Senator Warren and I recently teamed up to introduce the Non-Debtor Release Prohibition Act, which would prevent the non-consensual release of liability through bankruptcy proceedings. Translations, the Sacklers should not get a discounted ticket to ride into the sunset, protecting their billions of dollars. They need to be held personally accountable, and the amount that is charged against them should reflect the gravity of their conduct. As legal proceedings continue against other opioid industry defendants, we must demand that the worst corporate actors are held accountable for their role in this crisis. Far too many families have suffered as a result of corporate greed and malfeasance. Mr. President, I have one additional statement which I ask be placed in the record. I would just like to speak for a moment or two on that statement.
Without objection.
Mr. President, sometimes you have the best of luck in life, and it's not planned, but neighbors of ours in Springfield, Illinois, Tom and Bridget Lamont, have invited us to join them at their little house on Lake Michigan up in Leelanau Peninsula of the state of Michigan. In that time, we've had great experiences together, and we've come to know a terrific little shop called Barb's Donuts in Northport, Michigan. After years and years of wonderful service and great product, they are giving up the business soon, and I have put in the record a tribute to Barb's Donuts of Northport, Michigan. I am joined in this tribute by Debbie Stabenow and Gary Peters, the senators of Michigan, and I ask consent that this statement be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
The Republican whip is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Senate in quorum call.
We are.
I would ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in the time that I've been in the Congress, which includes 6 years in the House of Representatives and now in my 17th year in the Senate, I have been a part of or witness to or voted on numerous spending proposals and appropriation bills and tax bills and deficit reduction bills and debt limit increase bills. And through the years, And I don't think I've ever seen in all my time in the Congress a spending bill where Democrats didn't want to spend more and Republicans wanted to spend less. And maybe that's consistent with our overall governing philosophies. Republicans historically believe in limited but effective government, in personal freedom coupled with individual responsibility, in economic freedom, in peace through strength, and those are sort of guiding principles. And so when you get into a debate about spending and budgets and appropriation and taxes and all those sorts of things, Mr. President, in all the time I've been here, and I say this with respect to the bill that's we're going to be voting on here in a few moments, Republicans try and spend more efficiently, more effectively, less, because they know that every dollar that gets spent here is coming from an American taxpayer. And so when the bipartisan legislation that the Senate will vote on here momentarily was being considered, it started out at about $2.5 trillion. That's what President Biden wanted to spend on infrastructure. And Democrats in the Congress and the Senate, for sure in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate here as well, want to spend way more than what Republicans wanted to spend. Republicans, on the other hand, wanted to come up with a bill that met the needs that the country has, that was robust in addressing infrastructure concerns out there, but spent significantly less than what Democrats have proposed. And that's, I say that, Mr. President, simply because it's been my experience. I've observed this, as I've said, over the better part of 25 years now here in the Congress. At every debate, every fight about spending, taxes, and debt, Democrats want to spend more, Republicans want to spend less. And again, with a recognition that every one of those dollars that gets spent here in Washington, D.C. is coming from an American taxpayer somewhere across this country. And so, as we think about what we're going to do next, I have to just say, it is staggering to me what we're talking about. The dimensions, the scale, $3.5 trillion in spending, on top of $2 trillion spent earlier this year, much of which had nothing to do with the coronavirus. And much of the justification for a lot of the spending, at one time at least, was that we had to deal with the pandemic, the coronavirus. But that's not the case now. We still have ongoing issues there. We need to make sure that we're investing in vaccines and all the things that make sure that people in this country are able to combat and that we're able to get this pandemic behind us. But what we're talking about with this $3.5 trillion that the Democrats are intending and that we're going to vote on later today, $3.5 trillion, their own estimate, not ours, their own estimate. A lot of private estimates out there suggest that when this is fully implemented over the full window, you're talking about $5 to $5.5 trillion. You add to that the $2 trillion that has already been spent earlier this year, all put on the debt, by the way, all borrowed from our children and grandchildren, and you are talking about a stunning, staggering, insane amount of money. And, you know, I've heard the analogy used here on the floor and other places by Democrats saying, well, this is like the New Deal. This is a modern New Deal for America. Well, Mr. President, the New Deal occurred in the middle of a Great Depression where unemployment rates were running as high as 25%. The New Deal happened at a time when my dad grew up through the Depression. I've heard him tell the stories through the years. People were suffering. They were struggling enormously. And the government stepped in with some programs to help address that, to get people back to work. But what we're talking about here, Mr. President, is double the size of the New Deal as a percentage of our economy. Double. At a time when we've got, and the President was crowing about this the other day, 5%, 5.4% unemployment in this country, 900,000 new jobs created in the last reporting. And so if you think about where the economy is, we're coming out of the pandemic, people are investing again, people are getting out, they're spending money, and we're seeing growth get back into the economy, we're seeing jobs created. It is literally, to me, the definition of insanity to pour 3.5, by their estimate, by a lot of other estimates, $5 trillion more dollars into the economy to literally give people free everything. This isn't about addressing the pandemic or helping get people back to work. We have programs that do that. We have unemployment insurance. It's been in place now for a long time. And many of us think the plus up that the federal government provided for too long because it's keeping people from going back to work. But the fact of the matter is, we are talking about a massive expansion of the federal government, literally to give people pretty much free everything. Now, not only does that contradict, I think, what this country was all about, which at its inception was about freedom and liberty, personal freedom, economic freedom, individual responsibility, providing people incentives to achieve and to do well, making sure that we have programs in place, safety nets for those who need that help. But the idea that at a time when the economy is growing and expanding and unemployment is at a fairly low rate historically, we are creating jobs that the federal government would think that it needs, in all its wisdom here in Washington, D.C., to infuse $5 trillion. We already have inflation. It's the highest rate in 13 years. You think pouring a lot of flooding the economy with a whole bunch more money isn't going to exacerbate the inflation problem we already have? Not to mention, they're talking about paying for it. I don't think it'll all be paid for. I think a lot of it will go on the debt. And by the way, under this budget that's being proposed today that the Democrats are on a one-sided partisan procedure going to vote on is the biggest thing that we have seen, certainly in my lifetime, and will dwarf, as I said, anything that we've seen in history. And the debt at the end of all that, 2031 in the 10-year budget window, will be $45 trillion. $45 trillion, 130%, 134%, I should say, of our gross domestic product. There was a day when we were worried about borrowing up to 100% of GDP. Well, we've blown past that. We've dwarfed that. This is now completely out of control, completely out of hand, and we're talking about a massive new amount of spending to expand government, and to the degree that it is paid for with taxes that are going to hit individuals, they're going to hit businesses, that are going to hit small businesses, they're going to hit farmers and ranchers. You go down the list of taxes, of tax increases in this proposal, again, I don't know where you stop. And the idea, the suggestion by the administration that you're not going to hit people who make less than $400,000 a year is just absolutely, again, I think insane. I don't know how you can raise $3.5 trillion in taxes and not have an economic impact felt by people on the lower end of the income scale. Think about it. When taxes go up on businesses, what happens? Well, people work for businesses. Democrats think it's easy. We'll just raise taxes on businesses. Businesses aren't paying enough. Well, where do people in this country work? They work for businesses. That's where they get their paychecks. That's where they get their benefits. Wages go down when taxes on businesses go up, to a historical fact. And if you think about what also happens when taxes are put on businesses obviously, they can do a couple of things. They may reduce wages or not hire people or reduce the size of their workforce, but they also pass that on, the cost of higher prices, to people out there in the economy who are paying the price for that. That's what we are talking about here. It is just absolutely stunning, really, in my time in the Congress, to observe something that is being compared to, historically, the New Deal, in a circumstance where the economy is growing and expanding. People should be going back to work, and at a time when we have already a $30 trillion debt, as I said, headed in 2031 to $45 trillion in debt, and something that literally dwarfs, as a percentage of the economy, what was done at the time of the New Deal. The parallel, the analogy that's being used here by my colleagues on the other side. There is just absolutely no rationale, Mr. President, for doing this. But that's what it calls for, $3.5 trillion. Of According to Budget Committee analysts, it includes $4.2 trillion in spending when discretionary spending and increased interest on the debt are included. This bill, that bill, which was entirely unpaid for, and I'm talking about the $1.9 trillion bill that was passed in March, was ostensibly a COVID relief bill, but in reality was more like a list of payoffs to Democrat constituencies. Billions and billions of dollars for schools while keeping teachers' unions happy by omitting any requirement for actually getting kids back in the classroom, even though schools had barely touched the billions in COVID aid they'd already been given. And by the way, handouts to state with the distribution formula heavily weighted in favor of blue states included bailout for union pensions, loans for labor unions, and I could go on. And when we talk about the money that's going to be, in the budget the Democrats are going to force us to vote on later today, the additional spending that's going to be in there, that's on top of the trillions that we put out the door last year, much of which went to state governments, and many of which don't know how to spend the money they already have. We're talking trillions, Mr. President, much of which went to, as I said, blue states. But while that bill wasted a lot of taxpayer dollars, the problem with that bill pales in comparison to what is before us today. Today, Democrats are taking the first step toward a massive and permanent expansion of government that would be paid for on the backs of ordinary Americans. And my colleagues, as I said, on the other side of the aisle will tell you they're just levying taxes on the tax hikes on wealthy Americans. But that's not the whole story. Those corporate tax hikes that Democrats are proposing, that tax just isn't going to be paid for by CEOs and the board members of corporations. A huge part of that is going to fall on American workers in the form of things like lower salaries and fewer opportunities. The Tax Foundation notes that the share of the corporate tax burden that falls on labor is, and I quote, routinely found to be between 50% and 100%, with 70% or higher the most likely outcome. By substantially hiking taxes on corporations, Democrats will be substantially increasing the burden borne by workers. Not to mention reducing our competitiveness in the global economy by once again giving the United States one of the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. With our economy still emerging from the challenges of the coronavirus, it's very difficult to understand why Democrats would decide that we should make American businesses less competitive on the global stage. And that's the impact of just one of the Democrats' tax hikes. I haven't talked about the probable effects of their tax hike on small businesses. That's right, small businesses. Or the negative economic effects of their huge tax increase on investment. And then there's the Democrats' new death tax. That's right, a new death tax to add to our already existing death tax, which will reduce inheritances for middle-class Americans around the country. Not to mention threatening the very existence of family farms and ranches and small businesses. Mr. President, from the way that Democrats have been governing, you'd think that voters had given them a resounding mandate to permanently expand government and implement the socialist fantasies of the far left. In fact, we all know this, Democrats hold a narrow majority in the House of Representatives where they lost seats, and the Senate is equally split between Democrats and Republicans. And Democrats' far-left presidential candidates couldn't make it out of the Democrat primary. That's right. President Biden was able to win the Democrat primary and the general election because he presented himself accurately or inaccurately as a moderate. But despite their lack of a mandate, Democrat leaders are apparently more and more willing to let the far left of the Democrat Party run the show, which is why we're standing here today contemplating a $4.2 trillion spending spree to permanently expand the size of government. Mr. President, we don't yet know all the details of the Democrats' budget-busting spending legislation, but what we do know is not encouraging. In addition to taxes that will burden hardworking Americans and hurt our economy, Democrats are contemplating a new welfare benefit with no associated work requirement. Lots and lots of free stuff, like 2 free years of community college, elements of Democrats' most extreme socialist fantasy, the Green New Deal, amnesty for individuals here in our country illegally, funding for tens of thousands, yes, tens of thousands of new IRS agents, a tax cut for blue state millionaires and billionaires, and more. And by the way, on that point, Mr. President, it's really ironic to me to hear Democrats come down here and talk about Republicans wanting to cut taxes for rich people when this proposal in this legislation, 50% of the tax cut by doing away with the cap on deductibility of state and local taxes, 50% of that benefit goes to people making more than $1 million a year. So much for worrying about people on the low income scale. Democrats want to spend taxpayer dollars to hire hundreds of thousands of young people for a civilian climate corps to fight climate change. Civilian climate corps. No word yet on whether this is actually an effective way to address our nation's climate challenges, but that isn't going to stop Democrats from spending billions of dollars to find out. And Mr. President, I haven't even mentioned how all this new government spending is likely to increase inflation. Americans are already facing significant inflation, thanks in part to Democrats' earlier flooding of the economy with government spending. Now Democrats want to come close to doubling that spending, and I don't even want to think about what inflation will look like if they succeed in their spending plans. Mr. President, thanks to Democrats' decision to utilize special Senate budget rules for their tax and spending spree, they have the ability today to force through this massive spending package on a totally partisan basis. But my Republican colleagues and I will do everything we can to protect Americans from the consequences of Democrats' reckless legislation. And I hope some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, all it takes is one, will intervene before their party's taxing and spending spree turns an economic recovery into an economic disaster. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. President, let me start by commending my colleague from South Dakota, Senator Thune, for his explanation of what's before us next after the vote that we're about to take, and that will be getting into the budget resolution leading to a reconciliation package. And he's absolutely right. These taxes and this high level of spending is not something that our country can sustain. And I appreciate his outlining the very specific impacts it would have on the people we represent. But this morning, Mr. President, I'm also here to talk about how the Senate will do something very good today, prior to getting into the budget resolution. The Senate's about to make history. You know, we've heard over the years, in fact, over the decades, about the need for us to fix our infrastructure. Every president in modern times has talked about it. President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, President Biden. We've talked about it a lot here. There's a joke around town that Infrastructure Week has come and gone so many times that people are a little cynical when we talk about it. Well, today is Infrastructure Day. We're actually going to see what we've been talking about, which is the Senate on a bipartisan basis saying, you know what, it is time to fix our roads and bridges. We can do so in a responsible way, not by raising taxes on the American people, but by making important investments in long-term capital assets that will last for years. So it's an investment in fixing up our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our railroads, our ports, our electrical grids, our broadband network, and expanding that, and more. We've had a number of procedural votes to get us to this point, and based on those procedural votes, I think it's clear that we will have the votes today on a bipartisan basis to do this important work. The Senate will have done its job, and will have achieved a real, lasting bipartisan victory for the people we represent. The bill, called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, will improve the lives of all Americans by making these long overdue investments. $548 billion over the next 5 years in new spending to repair, upgrade, and replace the crumbling infrastructure all of our constituents rely on every day. That doesn't mean the money is going to be spent, by the way, over the next 5 years. It's authorized for that period. It'll be spent over the next 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years on projects all over the country. We know we need this investment. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives our American infrastructure a grade of C-. They also project that our economy stands to lose more than $10 trillion in economic growth, in GDP, by 2039 should we fail to invest in repairs. There's an international organization that looks at all the countries in the world and says, who's got the best infrastructure and the worst? And by the way, we're number 13 or 14 in that list now. So many countries are ahead of us. China spends about 4 times more than we do on infrastructure as a percent of their GDP. Why? Because they know that'll make their economy more efficient, and they want to beat us in the economic fight that we have globally. We want to win. That's one reason this is so important. The American people, by the way, understand the need for this investment. In 2 of the more recent polls from CNBC and CBS News, 87% of the American people back bipartisan efforts to fix our roads, our bridges, our water systems. We know that this targeted long-term investment in core infrastructure is good for the economy. Building out hard assets makes us more competitive in the global economy. We'll create hundreds of thousands of good jobs for builders, plumbers, electrical engineers, coders, and so many other fields. Economists, including Douglas Holtz-Eakin of the American Action Forum and Michael Strain of the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, have pointed out that this type of spending on long-term spending, hard assets, does not further inflation, but in fact is counter-inflationary. To me, not only does this investment make sense, but importantly, what we're doing here today also demonstrates to the American people that we can get our act together on a bipartisan basis and get something done. We can do big things on a bipartisan basis if we put our minds to it. Again, after years, even decades of talking about the need to do this, we're finally getting it done. Is it exactly the bill I would have drafted? No. It's not exactly the bill any senator in this chamber would have drafted, because it represents a true bipartisan effort. Each side made concessions to find that common ground. I want to take this opportunity to briefly thank my colleagues who've gotten us to this point. We spent a lot of long nights and long days working to write this legislation, and there's been a group of members who have been particularly committed to it. One is Shelley Moore Capito, who's on the floor right now. The work she did with President Biden early on laid the foundation for this. She's also the ranking member of the EPW committee that produced some of the legislation that we incorporated on the surface transportation front. But there are so many others. And I'd like to start with my counterpart, the lead negotiator on the other side of the aisle, Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. The 2 of us began meeting more than 4 months ago to have discussions that would then lay the foundation for our path forward. And it was in the context of President Biden having proposed a huge package, $2.65 trillion, so-called infrastructure package, and we believed we could pull out real infrastructure from there, take the high taxes out, and get something done for the American people. I commend her for her leadership, for her courage, and for her ability to keep us on track during some tough times during this process. From there, it truly became a group effort, particularly among 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats who spent a lot of long days and nights negotiating the framework of this legislation. Some of us have worked together before at the end of the year in putting together the so-called 908 framework for the COVID-19 bill that passed late last year. It was also bipartisan. To my friends and colleagues, Senator Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Joe Manchin, Jeanne Shaheen, Mark Warner, and John Tester, thank you for your efforts these past few months. I also want to give special thanks to our colleague Kevin Kramer, who joined our group late but was instrumental in finalizing this agreement. I want to thank the White House, and especially Steve Ricchetti and Brian Deese, Louisa Terrell, for their support of this effort and their commitment to trying to work in a bipartisan way to get it done. I also want to thank Senator Tom Carper, who just joined us in the room. Along with Senator Capito, he was the EPW chair, she was the ranking member that laid much of the foundation for this legislation, particularly with regards to our roads and our bridges. I want to thank my other colleagues in the so-called G22, who helped in the 22 different working groups that were formed to help put this legislation together. Richard Burr, Lindsey Graham, Mike Rounds, Tom Tillis, Todd Young, Jerry Moran, Chris Coons, Maggie Hassan, John Hickenlooper, Mark Kelly, Angus King, Jackie Rosen, 11 Democrats and 11 Republicans. And then to my colleagues who voted with us repeatedly to advance this bill toward final passage and helped us to get to this point by giving us good input that was incorporated in the legislation. Mike Crapo, Roy Blunt, Chuck Grassley, John Hoven, Jim Risch, Deb Fisher, Roger Wicker, John Cornyn, Dan Sullivan. Thank you for your input, your encouragement, and your support. I want to give a particular thank you to my friend and colleague, our Republican leader, Senator Mitch McConnell. I want to thank him for his encouragement and his support throughout this process, for sticking his neck out. I know he's probably the only person as happy as I am in this chamber to see us move forward with this legislation that will help us find a long-term solution to a major bridge, the Brent Spence Bridge, that links our home states of Ohio and Kentucky. I want to thank the committee staffs who did so much to lay the groundwork for this legislation. About 73% of the pages in this final 2,700-page legislation are legislation that either passed the Senate or cleared committees in the Senate in this Congress, and that's a tribute to the quiet bipartisanship that goes on at the committee level every day that allows us to get these things done with the requisite knowledge and expertise. I also want to thank all of the nonpartisan staff here in the United States Senate for their work as well. I know that over the past few weeks, especially, the Legislative Council has worked closely with my staff and the staffs of other offices to help formalize this proposal in the final text before us today. They worked weekends, they worked late nights, same with the Joint Committee on Taxation and the Congressional Budget Office. They've worked around the clock to get us to this point. And the staff here on the floor, they have been here just as early as we have and stayed just as late as any of us, in fact, later, to ensure that this could be possible. I thank them. I also want to thank the more than 100 industry associations, unions, and trade groups that came forward to endorse this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That includes business groups like the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the National Association of Manufacturers. It also includes labor groups like the AFL-CIO Building Trades Council, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Laborers International Union of North America. It also includes supporters from all levels of government, including the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors who endorsed it, the National Governors Association. It includes more than 30 agricultural groups, including the American Farm Bureau. These organizations and so many others like them have been critical to encouraging members of the Senate to do the right thing. And finally, I want to again thank my staff and the staffs of all the members who worked for months to get this bill to the finish line. We would not be here without them. There is no question about that. On a personal staff level, I want to thank Kevin Smith, Sarah Perry, Avery Pearson, Ann Gordon, Mike Sinecor, Lydia Dennis, Adeline Ewing, Connor Rabb, Connor Hinson, Kaylin Swihart, Matt Lloyd, and our entire comms team, Angie Youngin and Nate Denlow, Stephanie Mertz and Chris Mitchell. On my Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs staff, I want to thank Pam Thiessen, Amanda Neely, Sam Malopoulos, Kara Mumford, Trey Hicks, Liam McKenna, Jeff Post, and Emily Benavides. Again, we wouldn't be standing here and about to have this vote without them working their hearts out, staying late, getting in early, and ensuring that every single part of this bill has been looked over carefully to make sure we got it right. Everyone involved in this effort can be proud of what this body is achieving today. The Senate's doing its job. It's doing its job by helping the American people we represent through an historic investment in our nation's infrastructure that will serve the American people for decades to come. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes, followed by Senators Carper and Schumer for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, it's great to be on the floor today. I think we have much to celebrate. We have a lot of tired people, I think, who have devoted a lot of time and energy to this effort. And so after a long week of amendments, it's time to get this done, isn't it? Senator Carper, my chairman on EPW. We've talked all week about how the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act delivers for the American people. And I'm proud that the foundation of this bill, the foundations of this bill, is, as the senator from Ohio just mentioned, is based off of the two very bipartisan, unanimously bipartisan EPW infrastructure bills that we passed in the spring. This historic investment reflects our commitment to keeping America safe, improving our global competitiveness, and growing our economy. So I'm going to go through a few of the highlights because I think they're important for the American people to know exactly what this bill does. It provides $303.5 billion over 5 years for federal highway programs, a 35% increase from the last bill. There is a new $2 billion rural surface transportation grant that will dedicate resources to the Appalachian Development Highway System that runs through many of our states and other critical projects across rural America. Combined, the overall package includes $40 billion in dedicated resources for bridges, the single largest investment in bridge infrastructure since the construction of the interstate system. I'm from a small state, but I got a lot of bridges. And unfortunately, a lot of them are not in the best condition. This will be a monumental improvement in what I see every day in my state. The bill authorizes $35 billion for water projects across the country with a focus on upgrading aging infrastructure. This is the bill that we passed out of our EPW committee. It invests in innovative technologies and provides assistance to rural and low-income communities to help them keep their water safe and clean. This package represents the largest investment in clean drinking water in our nation's history. That's something that I think we can all be proud of. There's funding for broadband, essential to this 21st century economy, education, tourism, healthcare, all the things we've realized that broadband brings us and how important it is for each family and each business to have it. Ports, airports, locks and dams. Funding for the Corps of Engineers will improve our water resource infrastructure, facilitating the movement of goods and mitigating flood risks. Reauthorization of the AML program will provide billions of dollars to clean up abandoned mine sites. It's important in our state. Pennsylvania's got a lot of them, too. We're fighting against climate change, and we're cleaning up our environment. This legislation doesn't just invest in our infrastructure, but it will allow projects to move more quickly. Far too often, infrastructure projects are delayed because of the expensive and arduous environmental review and permitting process. An environmental impact statement under the NEPA Act for highway projects takes an average of 7 years. Think about how long that is and how much more money that costs. The highway bill unanimously approved by our EPW committee includes numerous project delivery provisions to provide a more efficient, predictable process. Notably, it codifies one federal decision. One federal decision for highway projects would establish a 2-year goal for completing environmental reviews. This isn't skirting the environmental process. This isn't running roughshod over it. This is putting a time clock on it. Let's move it. Require predictable schedules coordinated by agencies and requires a single environmental document with concurrent reviews, providing accountability and transparency. The EPW bill that we passed makes other common sense reforms, like allowing states to be reimbursed for early utility relocation necessary for a project while the process is ongoing. Additional provisions in the broader legislation will extend the Fast 41 permitting reforms that Senator Portman is very, very instrumental in to help us build other types of infrastructure more efficiently. The reforms and investments this bill makes aren't just for now, but for the next generation. We've had a very lengthy and robust debate on the Senate floor. I would like to thank Senators Portman and Sinema, Senator Collins, who's on the floor, Senator Portman, Senator Sinema, all of the group of 20. If I start naming them, I'm going to leave somebody out. But particularly Senators Portman and Sinema picked up the ball where I left it. I'd like to think I got it to the 5-yard line. Maybe not so quite, but I got the ball rolling and I got it moving in the right direction. And then they did the tough sledding ahead, and I thank them for that. I would also like to thank my counterpart, Chairman Carper. He has been great in managing this bill on the floor, but also to keep the guardrails on that we established to make sure that the bipartisan group, was following along what the committee had unanimously passed and how we felt would be the most effective way to invest in our infrastructures for the future. I would like to thank my entire EPW committee team, starting with my staff director, Adam, who's been with me for many, many years. What you don't know, and what I know, is that Adam was back in the back with Mary Frances, and they were the traffic cops through the whole amendment process. Working the committees, the different 5 committees, Republican, Democrat, leadership, all of the different individual members. So I'm going to give Adam 1 day off, and then I think he'll be right back at it. But I can't. He is really irreplaceable to our committee, but also to this whole process. And also in this chamber with us today, Lauren Baker and Murphy Barrett, and many, many hours of just incredible depth of knowledge in this area. We couldn't have done it without you. But I'm going to name the rest of my staff who's not here with us. Libby Calloway, Georgiana Clemens, who will be, I announced, to still not have her baby. I announced last time I mentioned her. She's still waiting. Marley Collier, Travis Cohn, Sarah Delavan, Will Dixon, Elizabeth Horner, Max Hyman, Tyler Jenkins, Jess Kramer, Jake Kennedy, Matt Loops, Kayla McMurray, Taylor Meredith, Jacob Mitchell, Kelly Moore, Catherine Smith, Travis Voiles, and Andy Zock for their tireless efforts that have helped advance our committee's infrastructure legislation. On my personal team, I'd like to thank my Chief of Staff, Joel Brubaker, and also J.T. Jazerski for their leadership. I really want to thank Senator Carper's EPW staff, especially Mary Frances Repko, who's on the floor with the Senator today, but also Rebecca Higgins, John Kane, Greg Dotson, Laura Gillum, Jordan Baugh, Heather Dan, Mackie McIntosh, Annie D'Amata, Kenneth Martin, and Tyler Hoffman Raridan for their dedication to this process as well. I will say, under Mary Frances's leadership and Adam's leadership on my committee, I think they have demonstrated to many committees, and certainly to us as the chairman and ranking member, that you can have conversations, communications, and you can work things out. You can work things out if you just stick with it. So thank you both very, very much. It's time to bring this bill home and do the work the American people expect us to do, which is to find bipartisan, consensus-driven solutions to our nation's pressing challenges. And this is a pressing challenge. Again, I urge a vote yes on this historic bipartisan bill that will improve our core infrastructure. If we pass this important legislation, I hope that the House will move swiftly, and as a former member of the House, as we all are, the House can move swiftly when they need to, and get this bill to the President's desk quickly. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I have 3 requests for committees to meet today during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, Senator Kavanaugh has been very gracious in her thanks and praise, and it's now her turn to be on the receiving end. We've all heard of the gang of 20 or the gang of 22, the group of 20 or 22. Before there was a gang or a group of 22, there was a gang of 1. The gentlewoman from West Virginia, my native state. And she joined in with the president and the president's team to really get the ball rolling. And sort of took the handoff from what we had done working with the administration, meeting with the administration, meeting with the president. But when the president, after that meeting, they decided to engage with you. And eventually, and you use the football analogy here, and you might not have gotten the ball into the end zone, but you certainly got into the red zone. And we are grateful for all of your work, and your good humor and good cheer, even when things were tough. I'm sitting right here. On my left is Mary Frances Repko, who's staff director of our EPW committee on the Democratic side. She's joined today, I think, on the floor by John Kane, by Mackie, by Tyler Hoffman, and we have Adam over here sitting next to the ranking member. Adam, I'm not going to go through. I've gone before through the names of your staff, but I'll just say you're all back there, and we are grateful for the great support and work that you've done, each one of you. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank. You don't get to be the floor managers without somebody in the leadership saying, well, we'd like for you to be floor managers. So Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell, thank you for putting your confidence and trust in Senator Capito and me, to the floor staff, the folks that work for the leaders, thank you very much to keep us on the straight and level and heading in the right direction. Rob Portman's still here on the floor. I don't see Kirsten Sinema, but Rob is here. And Rob Senator Portman succeeds George Voinovich, dear friend as governor. We were governors together and senators together. And I miss George every day, but you have more than filled his shoes, my friend. And we salute you for your leadership. And Kirsten's relatively new here, but she has really impressed a lot of people, taken the bull by the horns, indefatigable, never gave up, just wouldn't give up. And because of her efforts and the partnership she has with Senator Portman, we are here to today. I quoted a couple of times during the debate the words of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, when he's thrown out of office at the end of World War II, was asked, he left 10 Downing Street, is this the end? He replied famously, this is not the end, this is not the beginning of the end, this is the end of the beginning, the end of the beginning. And so it is here with us today. We are nearing the end of a debate and the final vote on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. And before we take a vote on the adoption of this measure, I just want to take a moment to reflect briefly on how this bipartisan infrastructure bill came to be. Senator Capito has already referred to this, but I want to reinforce it. In February of this year, at my encouragement, President Biden invited Senator Capito, Senator Cardin, Senator Inhofe, and me, all senior members of the Environment and Public Works Committee, to the White House to discuss the need to make bold investment in our nation's crumbling infrastructure. He asked us, the Environment and Public Works Committee, to lead the effort to address that need, to get to work in our committee by crafting and reporting to the full Senate, to this body, surface transportation legislation, roads, highways, bridges, as well as drinking water and water sanitation infrastructure, climate change legislation, by springtime. That was a request. In the weeks that followed, working together with all 20 members of the Environment and Public Works Committee, that's exactly what we did. 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans working together. And in May, we reported out of our committee a 5-year transportation bill with a unanimous bipartisan vote, 20-0. By more than a third, we increased investments in our roads, our highways, our bridges, with an historic climate title to help address the most serious challenge facing our planet, and that is the threat of global warming. That transportation bill is at the core of the legislation we consider today. Along with the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act, legislation was also reported unanimously out of the Committee of Environment and Public Works earlier this year and passed by the full Senate right here earlier this year by an 89-2 vote. That bill targets the most impoverished communities across America to help them meet their drinking and wastewater treatment needs. I'm proud, we're proud, of the work that our committee has done, made possible by the partnership that we enjoy. I think of the work that we did, Mr. President, I think it was like laying the foundation. Clean drinking water, wastewater sanitation, roads, highways, bridges, climate, really the foundation on which this package was built. And we try to provide an example to the rest of the Senate, the other committees of jurisdiction, and I'd like to think that maybe we did that. Leadership is all about leading. And the President sought and encouraged us to try to lead early this year, and I think we've met that request, and then some. I want to thank him. He didn't give up either. And he's been negotiating with Senator Capito, negotiating with the team of the Gang of 22, never gave up. A lot of people say this is a fool's errand. He never gave up. And I'm proud of him and the leadership that he's provided. But the bill before us, before this body today, builds on the strong bipartisan work of our Committee, Environment and Public Works, as well as good work done by our colleagues in other committees, Commerce Committee, Energy and Natural Resources Committees, among them. My appreciation to all who worked so tirelessly on this Herculean undertaking. Now, let me be clear. This legislation isn't perfect. It's been said before. You'll hear that again. I've never written a bill that was perfect, and this certainly, even though we've had a fair hand in writing a lot of it, it's not perfect. And Despite making real progress, it doesn't go as far as we'd like to go in advancing equity, the way we treat other people, golden rule, treat other people the way we want to be treated, and tackling the existential crisis of our time, that is climate change. There's much more work to do on these issues, issues that in my mind we have a moral obligation to address. So rest assured, I'll be joining my colleagues in fighting for progress on these fronts in the days and weeks ahead. But let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. And make no mistake, the bill before us does a whole lot of good. It's the largest long-term investment in our nation's infrastructure in almost a century, and the largest federal investment in history when it comes to public transit, clean energy transmission, climate resiliency, clean drinking water, and wastewater infrastructure. And on this day, the American people are looking for us to strengthen our economy and support our communities and build for our future. On this day, we have a president dedicated to moving past partisan divides and meeting the moment for our nation. And on this day, leaders in this body from across the political spectrum, we've come together and shared purpose, common cause, and commitment to find a way forward. I want to close with the thought that there's a lot of bridge money in here, a lot of money to fix bridges, all of West Virginia, Delaware, Ohio, Maine, you name it. There's a lot of troubled water in our country, troubled water. And I like to think of this legislation crafted together across the aisle, bipartisan, with the administration. We created a bridge over troubled waters. Think about that, a bridge over troubled waters. And right at a time when we really needed one. And we could use a few more as we go along. Sometimes when I travel, people ask me, say, what do you do? What do you do anyway? They don't know what I do, and on an airplane or whatever. And I say, I help people. And they say, how do you help them? And I think the best way we can help people is help them find a job, have a job that they can support themselves and their families. And we can help make sure that they have clean water to drink. We can help make sure they have clean air to breathe. Those are ways that we're helping people with this legislation, big time, and we'll be doing it for a long time. Colleagues, on this day, we can vote to make a down payment on a brighter future for our country. I want to ask you to join me in seizing the day in voting to advance this legislation. Together, on this day, let us seize the day. Carpe diem. Carpe diem. I yield the floor. Thank you.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader is recognized.
And first, let me, before I begin, thank Senators Carper and Capito for managing this bill and doing it in such a fine way, and their staffs as well. Now, Mr. President, it's been a long and winding road, but we have persisted, and now we have arrived. There were many logs in our path, detours along the way, but the American people will now see the most robust injection of funds into infrastructure in decades. In a few moments, the Senate will pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, dedicating over $1 trillion to strengthen every major category of our country's physical infrastructure. It's been a long time in coming. Our economy is #1 in the world, but infrastructure ranks number 13. You'll find better roads, bridges, airports, broadband in the United Arab Emirates than in the United States of America. Today, the Senate takes a decades overdue step to revitalize America's infrastructure and give our workers, our businesses, our economy the tools to succeed in the 21st century. The bill will make large and significant differences in both productivity and job creation in America for decades to come. To my colleagues, particularly the group of 10, then 11, then 22, who worked so hard in a bipartisan way, congratulations, congratulations on a job well done. Thank you to our committee chairs and ranking members whose expertise was required at several stages, and to the staff who sacrificed weekends, family gatherings, and most often sleep in order to finish this bill. Thank you. Can we have order, Mr. President? Thank you. Thank you to President Biden and his team at the White House. President Biden has been in office for only 7 months, and already the Senate is about to pass the first major infrastructure package in over a decade on a bipartisan basis with his complete and total involvement. Throughout the process, I have tried to prod the negotiators along when they've needed it and given them space when they've asked for it. At times, it took a deadline to kick negotiations into high gear. Other times, it required a few extra days to allow compromise to gel. But when the Senate is run with an open hand rather than a closed fist, senators can accomplish big things. So despite this long road we've taken, we have finally reached the finish line. Of course, we Democrats believe we need to do much more. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is a very significant bill, but our country has other very significant, very important challenges. Working families need help. Small businesses need a leg up. Climate change threatens the future of our planet. Our tax code needs to be straightened out. Other parts of our infrastructure, not addressed in this bipartisan bill, still need focus, attention, and help. So to my colleagues who are concerned that this does not do enough on climate, for families, and making corporations and the rich pay their fair share, we are moving on to a second track, which will make generational transformation in these areas. Once this bill is complete, the Senate will immediately turn to the second track in our two-track strategy, passing a budget resolution that will unlock historic investments in American jobs, American families, and the fight against climate change. The two-track strategy is proceeding full steam ahead. At its core, the Democratic budget, both parts, is about restoring the middle class in the 21st century and giving more Americans the opportunity to get there. Too many in the middle class are worried about their futures. The sunny American optimism has turned into a sourness, an anger, a divisiveness in the land. Bold, transformative action on both traditional infrastructure and on helping families, middle-class families cope, and on climate will restore that bright, sunny optimism that has been part of this American psyche for centuries. At its core, what we want to do is this. We want to, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the core, what we want to do is this. We want to cut taxes for American families. We want to create millions of jobs while tackling the climate crisis. And we want to pay for it by making corporations and the wealthy finally pay their fair share. After we pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill this morning, senators should expect to vote to proceed to the budget resolution. And we will begin the process for debating amendments shortly thereafter. Democrats are prepared to move quickly and decisively through the amendment process so we can finish what we set out to do before the end of the work period. The longer it takes to finish, the longer the Senate will be in session. At the start of July, I set two ambitious goals for this chamber before our August recess. One was to pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill to boost our economy, something the Senate has not achieved in many years, and this is a strong and bold accomplishment. The second was to pass a budget resolution with the kinds of transformative changes I've mentioned. Pundits called it wishful thinking in a chamber known for unhurried deliberation. Well, we are moments away from achieving the first goal, and I'm confident that very soon the Senate will take the first major step towards achieving our second goal. The Senate is on track to finish both tracks and deliver an outstanding result for the American people. I yield the floor and no, don't yield the floor. I take back the floor.
Under the previous order, all post-cloture time is expired. The clerk will read the title of the bill for the third time.
Calendar number 100, H.R. 3684, an act to authorize funds for federal aid highways, highway safety programs, and transit programs and for other purposes.
The question is on the bill as amended.
Yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Braun.
No.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Weinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Tonight. Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed. Mr. Risch, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer,
Christie.
Sorry.
Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young.
I didn't want to say that out loud.
Senators voting in the affirmative. Baldwin, Bennett, Blunt, Brown, Burr, Cantwell, Capito, Carper, Casey, Collins, Coons, Duckworth, Durbin, Feinstein, Fisher, Gillibrand, Graham, Hassan, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Kelly, King, Klobuchar, Lujan, Manchin, Menendez, Merkley, Padilla, Portman, Reed, Rosen, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Smith, Stabenow, Tester, Warnock, Whitehouse, Wyden. Senators voting in the negative. Braun, Cornyn, Cotton, Ernst, Haggerty, Hawley, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Kennedy, Lummis, Paul, Scott of Florida, Thune, Tuberville. Mr. Sass, no. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Peters, aye. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Marshall, no. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Romney, aye. Mr. Daines, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Kane, aye. Ms. Warren, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Booker, aye. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, aye. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye.
I brought them up before I knew that.
Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Lankford. Mr. Lankford, no. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Sinema, aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Young.
Elizabeth.
Mr. Young,
Sorry.
no.
Got it.
Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Shelby,
Thank you.
no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Murphy, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 69, the nays are 30. The bill as amended is passed.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Order.
The Senate will be in order, please.
And once again, congratulations to all of those who worked hard, so hard on this very significant and very important bill. And now we proceed to the second track. So, Madam President, I move to proceed to calendar number 122, Senate S. Con-Res 14, the concurrent resolution on the budget, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Do you want to go? Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker.
See you later.
Madam Vice President.
I got you. Thank you. Lujan Cantwell. Mr. Bozeman. I got you.
That's so old. Somebody found it in a drawer. It's from one of my other spots over time. There you go.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr.
I wish I knew who did it.
Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst.
And they found this one is actually
Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Gotcha. Yep, thank you. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. I got you. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Lankford.
right. Yeah.
Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran.
Okay, I have no idea the system you guys.
Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Sullivan,
Oh, there's more here.
Okay.
Mr. Tester,
You want me to write on these?
Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Tuberville,
I can write on these.
Okay.
But these are,
Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock,
okay. It's all good. You guys know it's good. We'll figure it out.
Gotcha.
Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Baldwin, Blumenthal, Brown, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Coons, Durbin, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Kane, Kelly, Leahy, Lujan, Manchin, Markey, Murphy, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Rosen, Sanders, Schatz, Sinema, Stabenow, Van Hollen, Warner, Warren, and Wyden. Senators voting in the negative. Got you both. Barrasso, Braun, Burr, Capito, Collins, Cotton, Kramer, Daines, Haggerty, Hyde-Smith, Inhofe, Kennedy, Lankford, Lee, Murkowski, Paul, Romney, Rubio, Sass, Scott of South Carolina, Thune, Toomey, Tuberville, and Wicker. Mrs. Gillibrand? Aye. Mr. Reed? I did. Aye. Mr. Booker? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen? Aye. Mr. Schumer? Aye. Ms. Cortez Masto? Aye. Mr. Cornyn? No. I got you. Mr. Hoven? No. Mr. Tester? Aye. Mrs. Blackburn? No. Mr. Portman? No. Mr. Graham? No. Mr. King? Aye. Mr. Crapo? No. Mr. Marshall, no. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Cassidy, no. Mr. Hawley, no. Ms. Ernst, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Ms. Hassan, aye.
As soon as you do 51, can I have it?
51?
Yep. And then I'll
31,
get these
51?
32, 51. The next one he has.
Got it.
To tag, and then I can get
Marianne, this is 3301. Do you have one that's 3251? No.
Mr. Bozeman, no.
I don't have the 3251 one.
Oh, here it is. No, that's 33.
Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Tillis, no. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Ossoff, aye. Ms. Smith, aye. Mr. Grassley, no. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Ms. Duckworth, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Ms. Lummis, no.
Are you okay for a second?
I'm sorry. Mr. McConnell, no. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mr. Sullivan, no.
Are you almost back to normal?
Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Johnson, no.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 49, and the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the resolution.
Calendar number 122, S. Conres 14, setting forth the congressional budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2022 and setting forth the appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2023